And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
I like dice in games. In fact, that's why my podcast is called The Dice Tower. I like the fact that I can take dice and drop them here in the tower and see what the result is. And while some games that rely too much on dice rolling I might not be a fan of, and I certainly don't mind dice being in the game either. In fact, the way I usually introduce an abstract strategy game is I say, well, this is a game with strategy and there's no dice in it. But every once in a while, there's an abstract strategy game that uses dice. And this is one of those. This game here, Saikoro, or I'm just going to call it Dice Matrix because that sounds cooler. And if you open up the box, inside is exactly what we said, a dice matrix. One person is the white piece, the other person is the black piece, and then there's all these dice. To start off the game, probably my favorite part of the game, is you put the lid on the box and you shake it up a little bit. Because of those walls, the dice aren't going to move around very much, but it really does shake them up a little bit, and you start with your random setup for the game. One person goes first, they're the white player or the black player, one person goes first, and then players alternate. It's a two-player game, and it's very simple. On your turn, you take your piece, and you move it to another piece within that, basically just to a legal move. Now, the amount of spaces that you move. For in this instance, white's here, he can move one spot over and go to this number 1. Because he moved one space, he can go to the number 1. However, he also has to check and make sure that he's within 6 spaces of the opposing piece. So you can never move too far away from your opposing piece. When he moves to a spot, and this is actually not a legal move because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 7 spaces away from your opponent. But let's say he could go here. Now there's an empty spot here, and players cannot pass over empty spots as they move. They also can't double back. If you want to move to a 6, you can't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You'd have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and move down. And so basically what you're doing is you're moving your piece around so that eventually, as dice are pulled off the board, as you move to them, you're going to run out of moves that you can go to. You're basically trying to stay alive and force your opponent to get to a spot where they can no longer move. As you can see, there's empty holes, which gives you fewer and fewer options. Because the dice are rolled each game, there's going to be a large random amount of boards that can be produced. But other than that, gameplay's the same. Move to a spot, try to force your opponent, push your opponent, make him get to a place where he can't move. That staying within 6 spaces of your opponent is a real pain in the neck sometimes. This game reminds me very much of a game called Hey, That's My Fish from Mayfair Games, in which players are moving penguins around in ice floes until eventually there's no more room for them left to go. But this game is a little deeper than that, and at the same time a little faster. I've seen a game of this take 5 minutes. I've seen it take longer as players really get trying to figure out where their moves are. And if you're not careful, you could lose the game in 3 or 4 moves if you just stick yourself into a spot which there is no coming back from. You can't look too forward in the game. I mean, there's no luck other than rolling the dice to make the variable board. You can't look too forward because you can plan, I'll go here and then move there, but if your opponent moves away from you, you have to move towards him. And so there's always that, you feel like there's this invisible chain between you and your opponent, and you can never get too far away from him. While at the same time, you want to use that chain to your benefit to force him to go to a spot. There's not a whole lot more to the game other than that. And yet it provides a pretty satisfactory experience. I didn't find it mind-blowingly fun. I mean, it's interesting, and I have a good time doing it, but I don't find myself saying, oh, I want to do it again. In fact, I seem to have more fun, putting the board on and shaking it up and seeing what happens. There's some other variants that the rules mention. As you can see, the rule book has a few pages with a nice explanation of a whole game here and why dice can move to certain spots. But there's some variants where you basically start with an empty board and you fill it up with dice. There's also one in which you keep going so that you don't have any legal moves. At that point, you win rather than losing. But it's a neat idea. The board is well designed. There's basically they're cardboard sections that all slide into one another to form the grid for the game. And the dice are, your basic generic red dice, while the white and black pieces are these white and black dice with no pips on the sides of them. And it just works well. And I think if you're the kind of person who likes this sort of game, then this is the sort of game that you'll like. Okay, that's a bit of a cop-out. For me, I'm feeling pretty much average about it. If you say, let's play this game, I'll play it. I'll have a good time, but not a great time. And I'm looking for a great time when I play games these days. And so, while this one has some interesting ideas, I think I might pass on it in the future. I played it with some people who thought it was really fascinating, as you can force your opponent and stifle them until they have no more moves. And that's an interesting idea. Is it for you? You'll have to play it yourself and give it a try.
Thanks for joining us today. For more written, audio, and video reviews, as well as the #1 board game podcast, check out the website at www.thedicetower.com. Until then, this is Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.